The Ukraine War, a comprehensive overview. The Ukraine-Russia conflict is a tragedy that has no easy solution. Millions displaced, thousands lost. Ukraine wants Russian soldiers gone. Russia seeks a new border, opposing Ukraine's NATO aspirations. Caught in this deadlock is the US, and Europe's fate hangs in the balance. In this video, we look into the historical roots, the current quagmire, and how we can make a difference. A brief summary of a long history. In the late 1700s, Catherine the Great absorbed much of Ukraine into Russia. Attempts at independence in the 20th century failed. In the 1930s, Ukraine suffered under Stalin, losing millions to a famine. In 1991, Ukraine declared independence, returning Soviet nuclear weapons to Russia. Today, despite ties to Russia, Ukraine is increasingly looking westward. But strong cultural ties with Russia remain, especially in the eastern part of Ukraine, where Russian's commonly spoken. Introducing the situation between Russia and Ukraine. On February 24, 2022, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a military operation against Ukraine, marking a significant escalation of tensions between the two nations. The invasion, which caught many by surprise, was seen as the beginning of a potential war in Europe, driven by Russia's demands for an end to NATO's eastward expansion. For months before operation, Putin denied any plans for an invasion. However, in a televised speech, he declared that he had ordered a special military operation to protect Russian citizens whom he claimed were subjected to genocide in Ukraine. To understand the current situation, we must explore the historical backdrop and long-standing tensions between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine, a democratic country with a population of 44 million and over 1,000 years of history, stands as the largest country in Europe after Russia. Following the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine voted for independence, a move that Putin views as an artificial creation carved from Russia by enemies. Russian President Putin has described Ukraine as a puppet of the West and has been increasingly concerned about Ukraine's aspirations to join NATO. The tensions escalated in 2021 when Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged US President Joe Biden to support Ukraine's NATO membership. In response to Ukraine's NATO aspirations, Russia started placing troops near the Ukrainian border. Reports of unusual Russian troop movements in November 2021 heightened concerns, with Ukraine warning of a potential offensive by Russia. President Biden issued a stern warning, promising severe sanctions if Russia invaded Ukraine. This was not the first time tensions reached a boiling point between Russia and Ukraine. In 2014, Russia invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea. Pro-Russian rebels seized parts of eastern Ukraine, leading to a conflict that's claimed over 14,000 lives. Ukraine, a country with a long history of desiring independence, has been a thorn in the side of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Ukrainian people have consistently shown their aspirations for self-determination and their willingness to distance themselves from Russia's influence. As early as 2001, a poll revealed that nearly half of Ukrainians supported their country's exit from the Soviet Union. Today, over 80% of the population firmly supports Ukraine's independence. The country is gradually embracing a more westernized identity, encouraging diversity, and cultivating a regime that Putin cannot easily control. But here comes the question, what exactly does Putin want? Ukraine's growing westernization poses a challenge to Putin's autocratic and dictatorial system. The country's journey towards democracy and its embrace of Western values serves as a counterexample to Russia's authoritarian rule. This divergence threatens Putin's grip on power and creates a potential catalyst for change within Russia itself. So he decided to use force instead. First, he invaded and annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula. Then, Russian-backed separatists captured the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk and declared them independent of Ukraine. Since then, Ukraine's been in a conflict with Russia that's resulted in the loss of 14,000 lives and the displacement of nearly 2 million people. Putin's held onto these regions for almost 8 years, destabilizing Ukraine and preventing it from aligning more closely with Western countries. However, in November 2021, Putin escalated the situation. Satellite images revealed the buildup of over 100,000 Russian troops and military equipment along Ukraine's border. Putin repeatedly denied plans for invasion, but later presented his demands to Western nations. His primary demand was for NATO to halt its expansion and move its military borders back to their 1997 positions, away from Russia. Western leaders rejected these demands, instead of supporting their military presence in Eastern Europe and putting their forces on alert. Russian troops continued to gather along Ukraine's border, and Russia conducted large military exercises near its border with Belarus. February 21st, the threat of war became imminent. Putin announced the immediate recognition of the independence and sovereignty of the Donetsk People's Republic and the Luhansk People's Republic, with Russian troops crossing into these separatist regions under the pretext of peacekeeping. Ukraine declared a state of emergency, and President Zelensky made a direct appeal to the Russian people, emphasizing the consequences of war. Hours later, on February 24th, Putin launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. World leaders condemned Russia's invasion, and anti-war protests erupted worldwide, including in Russia. Neighboring nations opened their borders to hundreds of thousands of fleeing Ukrainians, and NATO's response force was activated for the first time in history. The US deployed additional troops to Eastern Europe. However, the world is proceeding cautiously, as Putin controls the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons and has issued threats against those who interfere. Many countries have imposed severe economic sanctions on Russia and sent military aid to Ukraine. While Russian forces advance further into Ukraine, Ukraine is fighting back to stay independent. At the end of 2022, some experts like Hannah Celeste were asked to share the effects of Russian war on Ukraine and found 3 main outcomes. 1. Surprising Ukrainian strength. One important result is that many, including Russia and Western countries, didn't realize how strong and determined Ukraine could be in this war. They thought technology was everything, but Ukraine showed that having a strong will to fight matters a lot. 2. Changing idea of neutrality. Another result is that the idea of staying neutral in conflicts is changing. In the past, being neutral meant not taking sides, but now countries like Sweden and Finland are thinking about joining NATO for protection. Moldova is also talking with the UK and Romania for military help. This shows the countries don't want to be alone if they face unexpected attacks. 3. Demanding justice for war crimes. A third result is that people are not willing to ignore the bad things Russia did during this war. After Russia took Crimea and started the conflict in Donbass in 2014, there were mistakes made. Now, in 2023, people want justice, not just victory. They want a special court to deal with the war crimes and to figure out who's responsible. They also want to help the victims and make things right. As for what will happen in the next few years, the fighting is likely to continue. Ukraine will keep pushing back the Russian forces until they go back to where they were in February 2022. This means the war's not over, and it will take more time to find a solution. How can this war end? Many analysts believe Putin's objective is to topple Ukraine's current government so it can be replaced with a new pro-Russian regime. Timothy Snyder says ending Putin's war in Ukraine through support for Ukraine's victory. In a recent interview, Timothy Snyder, a history professor at Yale University, discusses the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and underscores the critical importance of helping Ukraine to achieve a resolution to the war. The arrival of Kim Jong-un in Russia. North Korea's Kim Jong-un's arrival in Russia via an incredibly slow-moving train and his immediate pledge of allegiance to Vladimir Putin is something fishy. What does it indicate? The geopolitical perspective. Snyder highlights the broader geopolitical perspective, emphasizing that both Russia and North Korea have strained relations with the West, making their alliance important in their respective narratives. This also shows that Vladimir Putin is in need for support, as the Russian armies expended significant ammunition. It takes us to how Russia might look to countries like North Korea to replenish its supplies. Re-evaluating the war's progress. Snyder challenges the notion that Russia was expected to have a quick victory in Ukraine and underscores the resilience of Ukrainians. He emphasizes that Russia doesn't necessarily have to win and that a clear defeat can reinforce international law, drawing a parallel to World War II. In further discussion, drawing a historical parallel to World War II, Snyder highlights the importance of long-term commitment and planning for a successful resolution to conflicts. Ukrainians and their ability to retake territory and carry out complex counter-offensives is something more than remarkable. Snyder disputes the idea of a stalemate and argues that it doesn't serve the Kremlin's interests. He urges continued support for Ukraine, especially during what could be a decisive phase of the war, addressing anti-war perspectives. Finally, Snyder responds to those who advocate for an immediate end to the conflict from an anti-war perspective. He argues that stopping support for Ukraine would result in continued suffering for Ukrainian civilians under Russian occupation, and that winning the war is the only way to end it. For those advocating an immediate end to the conflict, Snyder argues that stopping support for Ukraine would prolong suffering under Russian occupation. Victory is the only path to peace. To end this complex war, the international community must provide military, financial, and humanitarian aid, and hold Russia accountable. Only then can the war be brought to an end, and the suffering of the Ukrainian people be alleviated. In short, the war in Ukraine is a complex and challenging issue, but it's clear that the only way to end it is to support Ukraine in its fight for freedom.